I am hosting the, is it live now? Hi, this is Michelle Lynn. I'm now hosting the Allium Annals Resident Perspective Google Hangout that we've been doing before with Journal Club, but now with the Resident Perspective pieces. And today, it is my pleasure to host this huge panel of experts here to talk about something that just came out in Annals. It's called Does the Multiple Mini-Interview Address Stakeholder Needs? And it's written by Andrew Phillips and Gus Garmel over at the Stanford Kaiser site. And with that, I wanted to welcome them. And let's just jump right in and get into the meat of this, which is we have Andrew here, the lead author. And I was wondering if you can kick us off and talk to us about MMIs, or multiple mini-interviews, specifically as it relates to emergency medicine. What's its role? What do you think about it? And why this paper came about?
Absolutely. First, thank you very much, Michelle, and everybody at Allium for inviting Gus and myself to be here. We're very excited to share the paper. And so, briefly, the multiple mini-interview, the article ended up coming up because as both a medical education researcher and then as an applicant, I ended up being able to experience this with a little bit of background into what the MMI was getting at least in terms of its use for medical students. And the punchlines that came from that paper were threefold. One of them, there's a difference between the medical student and resident selection. There's a difference in terms of the factors of interest that the selection committee is looking for, and also a difference in the information available to that selection committee, especially since once you're applying for residency, you've already been through medical school, you have clerkship grades, etc. And the extent to that, the corollary question is you have to ask what the MMI is providing in the new setting. The second part of that is that the MMI is a test type, just like a standardized test is a type of test, or an OSCE is a type of test. So the SAT is a kind of standardized test, and the MCAT is a type of standardized test, but they're not the same test. As such, the MMI is a test type, but not a specific test. So every program or medical school that uses the MMI is essentially doing a different SAT or MCAT or what have you. So there's a lot of variability in terms of what that test is actually getting at, and that's important for the first point in terms of what that's providing, because it's going to vary according to what that different test and what you're using it for. And then thirdly, relationships matter. I saw on the Twitter feeds that was a very good point that people said, you know, there is a lot of discussion about how helpful interviews are one way or the other. The MMI interviews, the traditional interviews, and are they really useful at all? And looking through the literature from both EM and then other specialties, internal medicine, OB-GYN, etc., for applicants, the interview matters, and applicants don't have a special rubric or any kind of validated rubric. They just go with their gut, and their gut time and time again shows that they use the interview for better or worse.
Thanks. That is a great summary. And just to step back a bit, these MMIs are not just some form of speed dating where it's like traditional interviews done up faster and more multiple times. It's a very structured, one-way question, answer, analysis, or a discussion, not even really a discussion, it's a question-answer interview of the applicant, and there's really no feedback and dialogue between them. And I think that's the tough part that people are balancing between, you know, should we do this instead of the traditional, more laid-back type of dialogue where you're like, you say, you were awesome, and they go, yes, I know. And you know, that kind of dialogue is very different. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Dr. Bill Soares, who's over at Bay State. He's a faculty member, and he has done a great study with a whole team of people, which is about to come out in academic medicine, and I was hoping that Bill could share some of his sneak peek findings with us about MMI.
Sure. Well, thank you, Michelle, again, and thank you, everyone, for having me. And I think first, just to congratulate Andrew and Gus on a great paper and having that out. So our study kind of came out, it started initially when our residency program really decided to change its interview process. I think like a lot of emergency medicine residency programs, we have a lot of qualified applicants, and we did a traditional interview, just like you said, one-on-one interview, faculty, senior resident, no real formal structure. And you know, a few years ago as I was a resident, and I have to say it was really kind of one of the amazing parts of my former program, the faculty said, you know, is this the best way to do it? And they really critically evaluated this whole process. basically to make sure, are we being fair to all of the applicants that come out? We knew, and you can look, the prior literature says traditional interviews are just fraught with bias and lack of consistency and all the things you think of. And we had a few folks that had experienced the MMI themselves, and looking at the data, at that time everything was really positive. This was a structured OSCE-like interview that showed higher inter-rater reliability, less bias, less gender, less cultural bias, higher satisfaction among the applicants. Really, it was like, this is the way to go. All of the data looked like that. And so really what our program did was, to really be fair, rather than add it on as kind of as an experimental design and you could opt to do this, they said, no, if we're going to make this fair, we're going to change our system. And so that was most of my third year of residency, was being involved to help kind of restructure. And so we restructured, instead of 3 traditional interviews, we did 2 traditional interviews, and we added 4 of these MMI stations. And so the study itself, it wasn't about implementing that. That was a change in the program to try to make it better. The study was saying, okay, what do residents think about this, specifically emergency medicine residents? And so we made a survey basically comprised of other surveys from other papers. And I think one of the unique things was that we gave our survey during this kind of black period where both residents and programs submitted their rank list, but no one knew where they matched yet. This kind of safe period where you could kind of say what you want because you knew everything was set, but you didn't quite have the bias if you got in or didn't get in or something like that. So as you said, our publication, we're waiting for it to come out in academic medicine. We're really excited about it. And even though I have learned about how publications are under embargo, so I can't share all the details, but some of the stuff I can say is that really our results were different than all the other published studies. Applicants still thought that the MMI was free of gender and cultural bias, but really overall they enjoyed the traditional interview more. They really felt like it gave a more accurate portrayal of themselves. And that when we kind of bluntly asked, they said, no, we favor traditional interview over the MMI. And that was really something we weren't expecting to see. And so we kind of hope that this will help other programs, just kind of another piece of information that programs can kind of consider if they're thinking about this.
Sorry, I was on mute. This is the whole problem that we have, struggling between what we understand is going to be a much more objective way to measure the non-cognitive qualities of an applicant versus what applicants like. And I think it's just trying to balance those 2 things. And I do applaud, places that are trying to innovate and push this forward. It's just a little clunky because no one's really done it yet, and people don't know what to expect, and this is kind of a shocker. But I bet you, the college students going into med school now, where it's a very accepted practice, I don't know if you'll get that same response. So I think it's a matter of maybe expectations and what is the norm moving forward. But with that, maybe I'll just shift gears here, since we have the pleasure actually of having 3 current program directors or ex-program directors here with us. That maybe let's just start with Gus Garmel, who is over at the Stanford Kaiser program. He was the ex-co-program director there, and also the senior author on this Annals paper. And I was wondering, maybe could you share your thoughts about MMI and overall the interview day?
Sure. Well, thank you, Michelle, for setting this up, and for all the esteemed panelists. Great to be with a talented group, and just to Andrew for the hard work that he did on his paper. It really is an important paper, an important topic. So just to begin, and certainly again, thank you for including me. I think the goal of the interview day is twofold. One is for the programs to actually evaluate or assess the candidates or the applicants, but similarly, it's also important for the applicants to assess the programs. That's why we have the interviews. It's not done over the telephone. The applicants need to see the programs, the environment, the emergency departments, the location. But it is stressful. It's certainly much more stressful for the applicants or candidates than it is for the program faculty. That being said, there's a lot of information that can be gained from the interview, and I think it's wonderful that many programs out there are trying to be innovative and trying to do better with the art of interviewing. It's a skill set that's quite complicated. As a matter of fact, I was invited to give a lecture at the ACEP Teaching Fellowship for young faculty that was held at Dallas. On one of the lectures that I gave was the interview process and the art of the interview. And we talked about inappropriate interview questions and getting the most from the interview and making it valuable. And I do think that the MMI, although it's not quite catching on, is a unique and interesting perspective. And I think we will see more of that innovation. I was thinking about the interview process and what program faculty are trying to get out of that. And a number of years ago, I wrote something called the 9 Ps that program directors look for. And the 9 Ps, performance, productivity, professionalism, personality, preparation, persistence, punctuality, passion, and potential. And of those 9 Ps that program directors look for, actually only 2 of those are parts of the information that you can get from the application materials. The other 7 are from the actual interview. That being said, the interview shouldn't be 80% of the decision-making process, because that's a 10, 15, 20-minute, one-day piece of evaluation part, as opposed to 3 or 3.5 years worth of evaluation. So I do think that we need to improve the interview process, acknowledge how important that is, but also not miss the fact that it's important to assess and evaluate candidates based on their scholastic achievements and accomplishments. You're still mute.
You're muted, Michelle.
Oh, rookie mistake. I'm so sorry. Next we have here Lainie Yarris, who is a program director, the program director, over at Oregon Health Sciences University. And thank you for joining us. And I was wondering if you could share your insights from your perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Well, I definitely agree with a lot of Gus's comments, and especially about the two-way street nature of the interview. I think I'm really intrigued by the idea of MMI. I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, but I'm intrigued by it because one of the things that I really value in the interview process is finding out about those non-cognitive qualities in applicants. So I'm definitely reading these papers and watching the discussion and the tweets with much interest. From the perspective of the applicants getting to know us, I think that that's actually a really important part of interview process, which benefits us as well. And from my perspective, what we try to do is have the applicants really get a sense to have a true understanding of what the program personality is like, what the core values are like, and how well they think they'll fit. Because my hypothesis is that applicants do the best job of determining fit if they really get a chance to know what the program is really like. So we focus a lot on trying to just be as transparent and accurate as possible in how we portray ourselves during the interview day, because we feel that applicants who self-select because they feel like it's a good fit are those that are going to thrive and be happy and contribute to the program. So I'm still trying to figure out how MMI fits into that, and if we add MMI, how to structure the rest of the interview experience so that we can still have that accurate portrayal of what our program is like.
Yeah, great. I know a lot of programs are looking at MMIs and struggling with that exact same issue you mentioned. So it'd be interesting to see this moving forward. And then we have the closer here, Dr. Chris Doty from University of Kentucky. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, I agree with Lainie very much. I think the whole interview process is somewhat hokey, and it's difficult to pick up on a piece of paper who's going to do well in the program. There are some markers for that, but for me, the interview is critically important, and I also agree that that's where the fit really comes in. I view interviewing like dating, and I think that the whole interview process is the applicant dating a bunch of programs to try to figure out whether their vision of where they want to be in 3 or 4 years is aligned with that program director's vision, and where he or she sees their graduates in 3 or 4 years. And my concern about the MMI is that the applicants' needs are left out. The program can set a bunch of questions. They can look at things, probably things they have a reasonable idea about anyway from this myriad of information that we collect in Yarris. But I think what's really important is that applicant to have an opportunity to see the vision of the program, and I don't know if you get that in such a structured setting. So I think what may work is to have some set of MMI interviews, maybe 5, 6, 7, but then have some period where the applicant can sit down with the program director or with other leadership and sort of hash that out and see if this is a fit to where they think that their needs are going to be met, like any other relationship.
That's a great point. You mentioned the a more blended approach, right? Not just exclusively traditional, not just exclusively MMIs. And there was actually another great paper that just came out by Laura Hobson from University of Michigan in Journal of Emergency Medicine, which kind of looked at this at the EM applicant pool, except they surveyed people in the first month of residency. So they took 71 residents, first month of residency of 3 programs, and did this whole MMI thing as well as traditional interviews and surveyed them and kind of like what Bill looked at and found that just strictly MMIs alone would have a little bit negatively affected their decision about the residency program. But by far, there was some great findings that a blended approach actually was very acceptable to them. And it sounds like, Bill, that's the model that you had, right? It was a blended approach, or was it just MMI?
Yeah, so we decided to do a blended. We had our prior interview process was 3 30-minute traditional interviews, and we brought that down to 2 and then did 4 MMIs. And it's still, and you'll kind of see later in the paper, there were people definitely that enjoyed the MMI, and we do kind of a qualitative section and like a thematic analysis to really try to get at, well, what happened? And people, on the one hand, thought the MMI was innovative, that it allowed them to say things that don't normally come up, which I thought was interesting. They could express themselves different ways than, oh, let me read my CV back to you. At the same time, just as the panel said, there was a lack. It felt like in the comments that in some of the themes they didn't get back from that, and I wonder if that's not kind of part of what the MMI is inherently. It's a system. It's trying to increase reliability, and so it's cutting down on what's the factor. Well, it's trying to cut down on the interviewer and the interviewer's influence, and so by trying to gain a bit more kind of what they perceive as being fair, there's a little bit less of that interaction. And so I don't know, and this comes back to others in papers before, is that something that needs to be in all the interviews? Can it be in other parts of the day? And as you said before, is it something that maybe part of it was just people aren't experienced with this? And I think as Gus said, the interview day is a stressful day, and maybe part of our results are because of that, hey, this is a new thing and this is stressful. So it's definitely, I think, hopefully the paper will raise more questions and have people talking about it more.
Yeah, great. There was actually a great comment on the blog, and I was just going to read it to you. It's from David Jones, who said that while the applicants might feel some stress about being challenged, the applicants that we really want are going to be the ones that rise to the challenge. And I thought that was a really eloquent statement about the culture of MMI, and potentially another reason why maybe we should be implementing a component of that into interview day. So with that, I think we don't have anything else to discuss on our agenda. I was wondering if just open it up to the panel if anyone wanted to leave with some closing thoughts.
Well, I did, if I could offer a couple quick things. One that I wonder if, I think Bill was hitting on a little bit, that it perhaps is less that the applicants don't like the MMI or not game for it, as much as there may be just a subconscious loss of, I'm walking away from this and I'm missing something, not sure what it is, but something's missing. and then that plays into a decision. The other thing that I wanted to be definitely sure to pass on was in the process of writing this, I had the opportunity to speak with Kevin Eva, one of the originators of the MMI. Had a fantastic conversation. He was very candid about one of the difficulties of the MMI is this gray zone that they've had in implementing it in various programs around the country, or excuse me, medical schools around the country, is that the MMI does not specify that only the question presented is the thing that can be addressed, and that you can open up from that question and address different topics. Just at each station, at some point, you have to address that question. And as Bill alluded to as well, the further out you go from that question, perhaps there's less reliability to it. But there's a big difference in how strict you can and cannot be with the MMI, and I think that makes a big difference in how people get the interaction that they need from the interview.
Yeah, I think the MMI is super complex, and I think these nuanced uses of it, I think, come over time as you start implementing them and using them. So that's a great insight. And we have here also Nikita, who is an academic fellow at Stanford Kaiser. And I was wondering if you could share your parting thoughts.
Well, I wanted to just discuss, over the last 2 days, there's been quite a discussion on Twitter over this, and one of the summaries of the comments that have been made is the concern of over-reliance on the MMI. I think a lot of people feel that for medical students, all they have had is undergrad training at that point, nothing clinical. But for residents, or medical students who are applying for residency, they have had electives and their clinical rotations that presumably they were evaluated on their competency, professionalism during those times. And so perhaps what MMIs are trying to get at is already answered in these types of evaluations, maybe to even a better degree. And so what people caution on Twitter is, why reinvent the wheel? Perhaps we're already getting this data in some other format.
Great point. So I think in the interest of time, and since I know you guys are all busy, and I think Gus has to go work a shift, let's just go ahead and end here. And thank you so much for participating in this Google Hangout with us. And if any of you have any more comments, feel free to comment on the blog and Twitter, and we would be happy to continue this discussion going forward. So thank you, everybody, and virtual high five.
Thank you, Michelle, and everybody.